Yo, for real though, can someone do like a little dance that I can sync to the music?
No.
Oh.
Seems like you're gonna have to sync yourself doing that little mock. Yeah. Hey guys, welcome back to the Arthritis Podcast, official podcast of digital and creative media works, where each week we take something from pop culture and try to break it down to better understand it. My name is David.
Hi, I'm Ben.
Hi, I'm Adam.
And this week we are talking about the world building of Control.
And the building of Control.
Mostly about the building of Control, to be completely honest. Those of you playing along at home, also this is weird because it's our first remote one, so I don't know what to tell you about that. It's going to be an interesting ride.
I'm a bit uncomfortable already.
Yeah, I feel strange. I can't hear Ben tapping his foot, so I'm still feeling strange.
Swings and roundabouts.
Yeah, it's that metronome I'm used to. This week we're talking about Control, which is a 2019 action-adventure shooty. I was reading the word Remedy and shooter at the same time.
It's a shooty.
It's a shooty by Remedy Entertainment, written by Sam Lake and Josh Stubbs, directed by McNeill. Before we get into the summary, as always, let's go around the table, boys, and tell us what you thought about it. What do you think about this game? Now that you've played it, let's start with you, Ben. What's your kind of take on this one?
I haven't finished it. No idea how far through I am. I think I'm close to the end. Don't know. Can't tell. But I bought it for the express purpose of testing my new RTX card. And then ended up really enjoying it. So far it's really good. It was the kind of thing where like everyone was like, dude, you gotta play Control, you really like it, rah. And I was like, yeah, okay. So I bought it, I played it, and yeah, I got like a minute into the game and I was sold. So I was like, yeah, okay, I'll keep playing this game. So yeah, I really like it. I think it's really funny.
Yeah,
and it's fun.
It's funny as shit.
And it looks really fucking good on RTX.
Very good looking. It's hysterical.
It's very pretty.
Yeah, what about you, Adam?
It took me about 20 minutes before I was sold. It was right when you first like turn the corner to go back into the lobby, but there's a wall where there used to be a corridor.
Yes, I know exactly.
And that was like
yeah.
for a solid like 10 seconds, my brain was like, I just didn't know what to do. I was very confused, and then I was like, oh, fuck, I like this a lot. And then the game hasn't done it again in the next, like, 10 hours of playtime, which is kind of disappointing.
Look, it does it less often, but it does a lot more subtle things with, like, moving things around, or, like, you go back to an area and something is slightly different. I kind of had the same experience where, yeah, there was a moment about, like, 5 hours in. I don't know what exactly I was doing, but I went around a corner and, you know, an enemy jumped out at me, and I grabbed a piece of wall and like destroyed the dude, and then like gunned down a bunch of dudes, and I kind of like walked away from this completely devastated area of the map into like this pristine part of the building, and I turned around and like the door and the corridor I come through had changed, like they were gone. There was a different path back, and I was like,
whoa,
fuck is going on? And that was when I was
that's
like,
really cool.
I have to fucking play the
really,
rest of
really
this.
cool.
So yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. Before we get into the summary,
I haven't beaten it yet.
I think I'm the only one that's beaten it. The ending is.
Oh, have you beaten it?
Yeah, the ending's
okay.
questionable, but that's okay.
Oh, I don't. You didn't. You see, you
this
didn't
is a
say that. I just told you.
Today.
It's not super spoiler free, but because the summary includes the ending of the video game. So.
Oh, okay, thanks.
But you two can plug your ears.
Great.
You two can plug your ears when we get. You can just
we're
take
just
your
gonna
headphones
not
out.
listen. Yeah.
I literally have to edit this fucking podcast today. Why do I plug my ears for that?
Well, Adam, there's just incentive to finish before you have to edit.
I've got to finish. How long is this game?
It's got to hit like 12, 13 hours.
Oh, I'm pretty close then. Yeah.
Oh, no, I've got to be close at this point.
So before we get into the summary, this episode is brought to you by my novel, Maynard Trigg and the Creature Beneath the Veil. It's a low sci-fi story with elements of horror, sky pirates, and adventure. Head to maynardtrigg.com and use code June20 for 10% off your first paperback. That's maynardtrigg.com and June20 for 10% off your first paperback.
Just remember, it's flame resistant as well. See? The amount of time that I've set my copy of this book on fire. It will not burn. You get this book, you've got it for life. maynardtrigg.com.
It's a glowing advertisement.
He brought that out again. It's the second time we've seen him burn that book.
Jesus.
It's like the fifth.
I hate it so much. As always, time codes are in the description if you want to skip ahead past the summary. Jesse Faden arrives in the oldest house, guided by Polaris.
Sorry.
Okay, can you do like a little dance when you finish the summary? Because I'm gonna take my headphones off.
Yeah, I'll do something. Jesse Faden arrives at the oldest house, guided by Polaris, where she hopes to investigate the disappearance of her brother at the hands of the Federal Bureau of Control. Jesse discovers that the Federal Bureau of Control's director, Zachariah Trench, has seemingly committed suicide with his own sidearm. Picking it up, Jesse learns that it is an object of power known as the service weapon and is transported to the astral plane, where she completes a ritual and is selected as the new director by the board. Jesse then makes her way through the oldest house, destroying the Hiss, a strange otherworldly infection that threatens to consume the oldest house. Eventually, Jesse finds her brother, Dylan, who has been infected by the Hiss.
Sorry, go ahead.
Jesse seeks to eradicate the Hiss once and for all, learning that the slide projector she and her brother discovered during their childhood is the very thing that can close off the gateway to the Hiss. Jesse heads to the Hedron chamber, and when the Hedron resonance fails, she discovers Polaris and learns that Trench fell under the Hiss's influence during one of Darling's expeditions. Jesse ultimately confronts Dylan with the board's full power and cleanses her brother. Dylan then falls into a coma. Jesse finally accepts her role as the new director and remains in the oldest house to wipe out the Hiss for good. Let's get into some analysis. I want to talk, first of all, about where this game came from. How familiar are you guys with Remedy, like, as a studio? I mean, I know, Ben, you're probably a bit more across it than Adam, just given how weird the space was they occupied.
I played, like, an hour of Alan Wake before getting scared and quitting.
Cool.
That's about my extent.
I forget you're too scared for video games.
I'm too scared for video games,
I think one of the characterizations of Remedy as a studio was this kind of pseudo diegetic like inclusion of real life footage, like shot on a camera with like, you know, video games cinematics like spliced together into the game and stuff like that, and you see that repeated again here. How did you guys feel about that? Like, was that something that you picked up on immediately, or like, how did that work?
I thought that was cool as shit. I liked it a lot.
The lines are definitely getting blurry when your in-game cinematics look as good as they do. It's like, it can be hard to tell. It's like, is that real footage or is that a model?
There were a couple points with light effects where I was like, no, that looks too good to be in a game or like a pre-rendered cutscene or something. Anything where there was like smoke and really bright light, it was like just the way like hair and skin diffuses light, like the way it looked too believable. But I wouldn't say that like pulled me out of the game at any point.
If anything, like the FMVs in this game are like so well chosen to where they decided to like, all right, we're gonna have like, you know, they were like, we're gonna put it in like non-pristine formats to kind of like make it a little chintzy, make it a little harder to see, so it kind of blends in a bit better.
I actually thought that stuff was more obvious as shot content. I completely forgot about all those little like really
all
like
the videos
dumb,
with
like 60s like science promotional videos.
They were fun, yeah.
I love those. They're like my favorite part.
Those were like, they were really cool, but they were like, you could totally tell it was a person. Whereas anything where it was like a person in a room, it was like, it was more difficult to tell. All the like trippy shit was harder to tell.
Did you find the hotline stuff with Trench, did that work for you, where you're sort of going through these areas and it's his silhouette?
Well, that's a model.
Projected as a layer.
Yeah.
In between you and the gameplay. Did that stuff work for you guys?
I thought that was wild.
Yeah, insane.
Just from like an aesthetics perspective. I mean, like a lot of that stuff was like just kind of nuts. The level of like creativity in the aesthetics of this game from like a technical perspective, like apart from the fact that it's like one of the best looking video games ever mainly because of RTX. Those choices were like so smart and like fit so well with like what they were doing overall.
But okay, so one of the things that we talk about a lot with video games and stuff in general is like you pick an aesthetic and you stick with it. Usually what we mean when we say that is like Into the Spider-Verse has like a real like visual aesthetic, like a visual kind of gimmick. Like Firewatch, it's got that like cell shading. Like Dragon Age Inquisition and The Witcher 3 look like these kind of living watercolor paintings. What's interesting about Control is that I don't think it necessarily has a visual gimmick in that sense. Like it's not like cell shaded or like trying to be real life. It just looks very good, and then the use of everything else creates that aesthetic, and the use of like the fiction and the level design, and particularly the world, which we'll get to the house in a second. But I don't know, like that's so unusual to me. It's so cool and different.
I feel like they pulled off Insanity really, really well, because it's very difficult to make an interactive experience feel suitably insane to the level that you want it to, without it also being really disorienting for the player. And I feel like they really nailed the whole idea of, this place is not normal, but it wasn't at a point where it was like disorienting.
Yeah, it's not like Antechamber, which is like such a like 4D chess experience where you're just like trying to wrap your brain around it. Like you're able to play this game and understand it. Yeah. It's just when you try to when you start sort of like thinking about the logistics of the space you're in, you're just like, oh, this is fucking ridiculous. Like there's like a photo it's in like a background in one of the shots of like the cityscape of whatever city this.
I think it's New York.
New York. And it's like the cityscape in New York, but then there's just like they've included the old house, and it's just this massive fucking spire. It's like 6 times taller than any other building. It's just in the middle.
Massive concrete featureless structure with
and you're like, that's just
one window halfway up, and then 6 windows right at the top, and that's it.
Yeah, it's just stupid. And you're like, that's so dumb.
But then it does some interesting. Did you find like with some of those more weird puzzles, like I'm thinking specifically of the Ocean View Motel, that's very much like a Twin Peaks thing where it's like, okay, if you got to ring the bell to do the thing, these little like asynchronous puzzles.
They're not even puzzles. They're just like just do it, like kind of just like fiddle around.
Yeah, they're like esoterica. It's like come here and mess about a bit.
The game describes them as rituals, which I feel like is like just the most accurate like thing to call them. Like they're not mechanics, they're not puzzles, they are like rituals where it's like you got to go in here and do this weird esoteric shit, and then you'll be able to teleport to that, or like the key will appear, or you'll be able to open the door or whatever. Like the rule of 3 thing where it's like you got to turn the light on and off 3 times, which is like
the law of 3. I really like that. Yeah,
which is just such like a weird superstitious thing where it's like you think about it, you're like, I guess you could kind of understand if someone was like weirdly superstitious about flicking a light switch 3 times. So it would do what you want it to do. If you had a light switch on, you wanted to turn it off, you flipped it 3 times, it would be off. So in my brain, I'm like, I can understand this actually being a real superstition, but I don't think it is. I did like one Google search and I couldn't find it.
I don't know that it necessarily. I mean, like the law of 3 is like a thing.
That sounds more like an obsessive compulsive thing than a superstitious
it is.
thing.
Yeah, but like the rule of 3 is a concept, like exists everywhere. Like
the law of 3 exists.
Yeah, it's like a rhetorical. Yeah, it's a rhetorical device to be. It's like Obama used it a lot, where you punctuate your point with the same kind of like catchphrase or whatever, and if you do it 3 times, like for some reason, because the human brain is a pattern recognition machine, and 2 things is not a pattern, but 3 things is, and 4 things is boring or like it loses its impact, but 3 is like that magic number where it's like 1, 2,
It's like
3.
that one Winston Churchill speech. We'll fight them on the beaches. We'll fight them on the fucking whatever. We'll fight them in the whatever. That list was originally like 5 different places that we will fight them on long, and it was really fucking dumb sounding. He just went on. Whereas every time it's been like edited, it was just 3.
Exactly. And so but I think that's indicative of what this game does well, which is tap into very mundane things in the context of this very strange world. And this is where I want to talk about the house and the Federal Bureau of Control and the kind of the key themes that exist in this game. So I want to hit you guys with some context from Cameron Kunzelman first, who's a writer for Waypoint. But before
fucking
that,
right, Cameron, mate, if you ever see this, can you please upload like a better photograph of yourself, like that's a little bit further away from you?
Yeah, Adam's annoyed because I quote you a lot.
The last time I had to put you in a quote, it was like I had to use this really close shot of your face, and it was like it just didn't really work. We tried to do like body shots with a little bit more movement, like just anything. Just post it on your Twitter. I'd be like super appreciative.
Okay, that was very weird. That's the most meta thing that's ever happened on this show. So obviously, like the key conceit of the game that Ben was alluding to before, the reason it's funny as hell is that you have these insane preternatural, bonkers superpowers and like gateways to other fucking dimensions and whatnot happening. But you also have this bureaucracy and this like middle management, paper pushing, memo writing, sign off required process. And we've all worked in very large businesses where bureaucracy is like the name of the game. I worked in HR in a large business, which is like triple bureaucracy. And half of the things in this game that had me pissing on the floor with laughter were just like those little moments of just complete fucking nonsense. Like two of my favorites just off the top of my head before we get to this Cameron thing. I don't want to hear if you guys have any off the top of your head. One of my all-time favorites is it's in like the interdimensional, like the dimensional studies area. And there's like an HR incident where someone is using the interdimensional like testing environment to like steal people's lunch out of the fridge. And there's like they get like a written warning from HR. It's great. And then my other favorite one is the very carefully documented and designed extensive experiments about an atomically static rubber duck.
I love the rubber duck. Quack if you can understand me.
The duck is like,
I need you to run me through this.
So basically, you come into this room, and I'll find some footage for you, but you come into this room, and there's basically just like these big kind of steel cages where they're examining objects of power, and in one of them is just a single rubber duck. And you walk next to the rubber duck is an audio tape of an experimentation with the rubber duck, and it's this very bored sounding woman who is just like doing like these scientific experiments where she's doing things like electrocuting the duck and talking to the duck and stabbing the duck and doing all of these things to the duck, and then at the very end she goes, okay, final test, checking for consciousness or whatever, and she goes, quack if you can hear me. And nothing happens. And but the tape doesn't end. Like it goes for a good 10 seconds and then you hear like and then it ends. And I was crying with laughter. It's like quack if you can hear me. And I was like,
please.
And then I just hissing, like it's so dumb. And if you do some more investigation like around that, you can discover that like it's like perfectly like atomically static. Like it just exists. It's just like it exists. Like the physics of it, like it exists outside of like time and space. Like it's unchangeable. The rubber duck will always be. You can move it around, but you can't change its molecules.
Wow, so
it's
you
never
can't, like, melt it down and turn it into like a bouncy ball.
They put it on a Bunsen burner and it just doesn't burn. Like she electrocutes it. She tries to smash it with a hammer. Like nothing happens.
Are rubber ducks atomically static? Is that the new thumbnail for the video?
It's pretty good. Did you guys run into any like particular moments like that stuck out in your head of like that bureaucracy just gone crazy in the context of this insane world?
I just love like people were arguing about like the most petty dumb shit, but in the context of sci-fi shit. It was great.
Yeah, it's it's kind of this mixing of like this crazy shit that's like completely off the chain, and then someone complaining that the fucking old house moved the toilet again and I can't find it. It's like, I swear to God, I'm gonna quit this job if the toilet moves again. Yeah. It's like, like, just shit like that is so funny because it's this crazy mix where it's like just this completely bonkers environment just filled with normal people who are like, hey, fucking whatever. Like, and there's a video clip. It's like a behind the scenes footage from all of from some of the Darling videos.
Yeah.
And it's just that guy and that girl who are like his assistants or something, and it's just like B-roll of them like working, and you're kind of watching it, and it's like really obvious that the guy has like a massive crush on the female assistant.
Okay, yeah.
And there's all this B-roll of him like being really awkward and like trying to like, you can tell he's like wanting to drum up conversation and she's just like walking up, and it's so funny.
That's great. I love stuff.
They're
like
in this like crazy lab where like they're testing like the fucking like, you know, the interdimensionality of the old house, and
he's out here trying to flirt.
He's trying to flirt.
I love it. It's that mundane. It's the contrast of the mundanity of like human bullshit in the face of this like this ever-changing cosmic horror. But it's like, yeah, but I still need you to sign that memo, dog. Like, it's that kind of tone that I think carries the game.
I love the posters a lot. They were really, really cool. Like all the posters that looked like just normal shit that you would see
in an
HR
office,
departments put up, but it was all like super stylized, and then
or instead of like don't leave your dishes in the sink, it's like don't leave your dishes next to the like cosmic vortex because they'll end up in sanitation again, but they'll be turned into birds or something. Like that kind of wacky shit. I'm going to read this quote from Cameron Kunzelman, and then I want to talk about The Oldest House. I think, Adam, I tasked you with some research on brutalism, and we'll get to that in a second. What I wanted to call attention to is that I think the game, if the game is trying to say anything, this is, I think, what it's trying to access. And that is that you're this outsider who is this kind of decentered protagonist, right? Where other AAA games start you off as the lowest rung on the ladder. I'm thinking about like AC Brotherhood, Shadow of Mordor, like your typical kind of AAA, like your Far Cry 3s, these typical AAA games where you start as just like a regular dude and you acquire these skills and you become, you know, super powered. You become like the agent with all of the ability to change the world. Control does something different from that, but also doesn't rely on what a lot of other games do, which is like the Dragon Age 2 or the Assassin's Creed 1, where at the start of the game, as this kind of hook to get you interested, you start off with like access to all of your powers, then you get depowered and you have to go back to the start and build it up again. Control doesn't do that, and I think for a very specific reason. Jessie is this outsider who, as the game goes on, you discover, without spoiling too much for you guys, like you discover that the Bureau has a vested interest in her life beyond what maybe we initially thought. But the fact that she is an outsider and that she is the most powerful person in this building is kind of a curiosity to me, because the board effectively says and approves her to have this power, right? She picks up the gun, but if you remember that initial ritual scene, the board is the one that actually approves that she keeps it, because they can strip it away from her. They can take that power away. So yes, she has this power to defeat the Hiss. Yes, she has the agency to go and, you know, find her brother and investigate the Bureau, but it's actually at the board's approval that she does that. And at any moment, they could step in with the hotline and take that away. So as much as the game is trying to give you this agency and this power, there is an element of it where at any stage, they could kind of step in and change that. And yes, you are in charge. You do have these superpowers, but everything the board does that then leads you to go and take action, that then leads to all of your heads of department taking their action, and then leads to your team leaders and your line managers taking action, to then your drones on the ground taking action. That all matriculates down from the fact that the board says it's okay. So even though the board are the people that basically allowed this catastrophe to happen, they also sit as this kind of linchpin of I guess like they're sort of they are the control in the game control. Like they control everything that happens. They approve everything that happens. And I think Cameron's tapping into that with this quote. So I'm just going to read you this from Cameron. Then I want to talk about The Oldest House and brutalism, because I think it leads into that perfectly. Quote, "The board's nefariousness helps us shatter both the implicit fiction of control and this fiction in our own world. The board pretty clearly distributed objects of power to preserve itself, and Jessie operating is as much of a shield as she is a sword. The board is reaching out from the astral plane to assure its own existence in the same way that the investment class creates hierarchies of labor to continually generate capital for itself. The board is a metaphor sometimes, but the metaphor doesn't have to stretch too far. The board and the real boards operate in the same way. The glimmers of critique that happen in Control are opportunities for us to think outside the rigid framework of received knowledge about the relationship between the power we're given and the power we wield. I have an idea, based on the facts in the game, that Jessie might be able to maintain her connection with objects of power, even if the board said no. I have an idea that she's made an easy alliance, one of convenience, that so many of us make every day with the hierarchies that we exist within. I hope she renegotiates it." Quote. That idea of like, it does feel throughout the game that if Jessie decided, she could take that power back somehow. I think when you talk about The Oldest House and the board, in contrast, the board is just this kind of controlling force. They're the people that Jessie makes this tacit agreement with, which is like, if you let me use the gun, you will kind of tacitly let me go and track down my brother. I think the house is something else entirely. It sits outside of that power structure and the metaphor, in fact, because obviously the game is going for this idea that individualism is not the answer in and of itself. Like if that was the case, at the end of the game, like Jessie would like the federal, she would disband the Federal Bureau of Control and like destroy the oldest house and like, take the power back from the man kind of thing. That doesn't happen.
I didn't think that was going to happen anyway.
No, it doesn't feel like that kind of game, does it? So I think that's why it's important. The house decenters her as a protagonist because the house kind of has a life of its own, kind of has a meaning and a ritual of its own. And the fact that it represents so much of a particular era and a particular aesthetic of architecture, I think reflects perfectly the way that this game is trying to critique control in general as an idea, particularly in those hierarchical structures, and bureaucracy in general, and this idea of like government and like oversight and stuff like that. So Adam, like hit me with the
block of concrete for sure.
The concrete, yeah.
Brutalism. I actually talked to a friend of mine who's an architect, so I could get like a really accurate definition of what it is. Because it seems like from place to place there tends to be a different definition, or at least like your average Joe on the street doesn't perfectly know what it is, but they have an idea. So brutalism's most common and consistent feature, this is a direct quote by the way from my boy Ken, common and consistent feature is the use of mass concrete to create unusual shapes, setbacks, cantilevers, patterns, textures, light and shade. Through just one material, all of these aesthetic benefits are realized. That is what it is.
And so in the context of the game, I guess, and hopefully some footage will help clarify this a little bit, but
yeah.
one of the key aspects of the game is that you move through these brutalist spaces, which are very much they're concrete, those harsh angles, and you, as the player, as Jesse, with this telekinesis and your ability to destroy things, you disrupt that space.
Yeah.
So in a very real sense, with that metaphor we were talking about before of like this examination of hierarchy and power structures, Jesse is imbued with the ability to physically disrupt this very rigid space and also disrupt the power structure of the oldest house by going after her brother and like ignoring the hiss and stuff like that. So I think that they're interlinked.
Yeah, I feel like specifically for control, if you're just listening and you can't see all the examples that I'm going to put on the screen right now, this kind of brutalism is a very specific kind, which is just the fucking astronomically, ridiculously huge version. So think of places like National Theatre, think of places like the Barbican, think of places like that one university in France that was the place that they set the movie Raw. Fucking weird film, man. I don't recommend that you go watch it. Very
specific draw, yeah, okay.
It's like, look, that's, I don't know the name of it, so that's what I'm gonna, images are on the screen, go to the YouTube channel. Anyways, so there's one other concept that I wanted to talk about, and this is the idea of ruin value, which is a pretty fun idea. It's the idea of designing buildings with their eventual ruins aesthetic appeal in mind. Yeah, it's building to a very specific idea by a very specific person whose specific name I'm not going to be mentioning because we don't want to get demonetized. The idea was first explored by artists in like the 18th and 19th century. What they would do is they would imagine current or recent buildings in a demolished or a destroyed state, 1,000 years down the line, right? Mm. Really, where it was first notably actually implemented into practical design was in the Third Reich. Albert Speer, who was the Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production, and also a big name in the German architectural game at the time, remarked the following. So this is a quote. What then remained of the emperors of the Roman Empire? What would still give evidence of them today, if not their buildings? So today, the buildings of the Roman Empire could enable Mussolini to refer to the heroic spirit of Rome when he wanted to inspire his people with the idea of a modern imperium. So he was able to use these demolished, destroyed buildings as a means of getting people behind his cause.
Mm-hmm.
Painter wanted to be able to do this also, but he really couldn't. There were German buildings with heritage, but none that specifically represented the kind of imperialism and the kind of structure that he wanted to represent.
Yeah, well, because he was all about that monomyth of the Golden Age. Like that's why he called it the Third Reich, the Third Empire. He wanted to draw on that symbolism and that history of that imperialism.
And just by the way, every time we say
Painter Boy,
we're just talking about the leader of the NSDAP. We're going to just replace all the words. So if you're getting confused by that, that's what we're doing.
Painter
We actively wanted to avoid modern, what he called anonymous materials like steel and concrete when he was creating important buildings that, or like government buildings, right?
Mm-hmm.
He thought that brutalism, which was sort of just starting to become the architecture of the time, was timeless, which I think is a really, really interesting idea. And I feel like this may be part of the reason why they chose this specific aesthetic for the game.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you look at a brutalist structure like the Oldest House, and the same can be said for a lot of contemporary modernism as well, but brutalism just looks better. Don't at me. You can't place it to a person or a group or a location or even like an abstract idea.
Right.
It's not a stretch to say that this kind of design feels like it exists outside of time and space.
Yeah.
So that's why it makes the perfect aesthetic for the Oldest House.
That is fascinating. And I think doubling down on that concept as well, what you said about that idea of like you designing it to be ruined, the very fact that they picked, I mean, it all kind of bleeds perfectly into the gameplay and the themes the game is trying to tackle, where it's like you have this place that feels outside of time and space, like you said, but you're actually able to exert control over it and alter it. That is how powerful, like that's how powerful Jessie is, right? Mm-hmm. She has the ability to affect this space that feels like it's been there forever and feels like it will be there forever. And the fact that the house reverts, in fact, that it reverts when you've left an area and that it heals itself adds to that effect of like, this thing has always been here, this thing will always exist. You cannot alter something that exists outside of time and space.
Yeah, it's like, it's not the Federal Bureau of Control. It's a building that the Federal Bureau of Control are using.
They happen to occupy it.
Yeah, that's a very important distinction.
This is and always will be.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think Remedy and a lot of the material they examine in their content and their video games, like they're really kind of concerned with that idea of time and age and longevity. I mean, Alan Wake is a series, it's all about like legacy and understanding, like similar to a lot of King's work, it's about going, well, what is the nature of like good and evil, and does it really matter? Or is it more about legacy and like making sure that you're remembered, that kind of thing? I think as you get further into Control and you start to look at the contrast of you're playing, or the space itself exists beyond time and space. It's sort of this forever house. Then you have Jessie, who is this decentered protagonist who is important because of a thing she discovered as a kid. She's kind of really nobody ultimately. Then you have the power structure of the board that gives her the ability to affect this space. Essentially, if you're pulling all those themes apart and trying to like titrate it down into something of any sort of meaning, the fact that a regular person through circumstance is then granted the power through this hierarchical structure to come into this place of bureaucracy and disrupt the bureaucracy, right? She doesn't get like this. It's not like you sign a memo and they're like, hey, now you're the director. You go through this weird ritualistic trial. Like, you don't discover papers lying around that are like, here is why Zachariah Trench was like the best candidate for the director. It's like, no, you don't know how he came to power. You don't know why you're a good candidate. You just are. It's almost like in the act of making Jessie the protagonist, she kind of exists beyond the bounds of some of these rules and beyond the bounds of the Oldest House. The real question I have is, if she leaves the Oldest House, does she lose the power the board is giving her?
Don't know. Haven't finished the game. I would guess no, because the powers granted to her, like, no, I'd say no.
Yeah.
I don't know.
What do you mean by leaving the Oldest House? Do you mean leaving the Federal Bureau of Control, or do you mean literally leaving the space?
Going out the front door.
Well, objects of power and people that are like supernatural, they exist in this world outside of the Oldest House. So like, I don't see.
Yeah, it is said that only. I mean, this is like getting into like game theory, but there are like some memos that state that like only directors can bind to objects of powers. So it's like it does seem to be like interlinked to the board and like being in the FBC.
Yeah. So I'm talking more thematically, because what we were talking about before is this idea of when you exist in this power structure, they grant you agency, right?
So not in a game theory way.
No, but like in every sense of the word, every agency Jessie is given to discover what Polaris is, to find her brother, all of that stuff is effectively granted to her by the board, right? It's kind of what we like. She is, in a sense, like a tool of the board. She is a weapon that is given like her ability to change the world from these people. So if you leave that space, if you leave that power structure, is she maintaining that agency? Is there something intrinsic about that recognition of like, oh, now I can change the world? Do I keep that? Whether or not she keeps the actual superpowers and can fly and shit and do whatever else outside of this space, I think it's an interesting question of like, of when you do disrupt these spaces and you realize there is an ability to change the way bureaucracy functions and to change the way, in Cameron's words, to change the way that we receive knowledge about the relationship between power we're given and the power we wield, right? Jessie is given these superpowers, but the power she wields is not in fact the superpowers, but in fact her drive and her decisions to keep pursuing the right path. You know, instead of at the fork in the road where it's like you could side with the hiss or you could continue down the virtuous path, she chooses the virtuous path. That is her agency, not in fact the gun. Like the gun is really an accessory to her decision making.
From like a sort of parallel perspective, if you're sort of talking about Jessie, because like a big part about like the FBC is that like they're hidden and like no one knows about them, and then you've got this outsider character who comes in, is like elevated so quickly to the top level. Again, I haven't finished the game, but you know, there's this idea that like, yeah, if she were to like leave, like, does the power follow her?
Right.
Gonna do it again and bring up Edward Snowden. It's kind of a parallel there.
Definitely.
You've got this normal dude who ended up working for the NSA in the US, rose up a bunch of levels, ended up with all this, you know, quote unquote power. You know, like it's the kind of thing where it's like when you're at that level, it's like, you know, he had access to so much stuff. It's essentially a superpower. Like, well,
no, but and then he through that just was able to uncover the corruption that was within that organization. It's literally what happens in this video game. There's a plug your ears, both of you. There's a twist toward the end where you discover that Trench is the one that invited the hiss in.
Oh, I didn't close my ear cups in time. Oh no.
And that is emblematic of that real life process that Snowden was like, this is the dirt that we've revealed. There's definitely a one-to-one parallel there. It's not even a metaphor. It's just replicating history.
Yes, I agree, David. Good point.
You. Yeah, it actually does kind of tie in quite closely to then the silly sort of 33 Thomas Street kind of thing. So there's this building in New York on 33 Thomas Street, which is like, it's a really old brutalist building. It used to be like an AT&T building, and then part of like the Snowden leaks, kind of people are like, it kind of implied that building was actually like an NSA surveillance hub or something. Oh, and so they're like, so there's like, it's kind of conspiracy theory territory, but that
doesn't sound like a conspiracy theory. It's like every big organization has like secret buildings.
Yeah, but it's like, it's in New York. It literally looks like the building from Control.
But no, I think from what we were saying, one of the key themes that we pulled out, and this might be a good place to kind of then pivot and dovetail into the end, is that I think it's always interesting when the game is ostensibly about control in every sense of the word. Like the name is so interestingly on point. Like, yeah, it's about control and like the board and the Bureau of Control, but it's actually really about like the way that hierarchies give us power and agency and the way that we interact with those. Whether or not you agree with the politics of it, which is that, you know, an individual can be imbued with agency to change it, or you know, but is she really imbued by agency to change it on behalf of or with permission from the people running it? It's kind of a gray area. Like you can't really change a system from within unless the people at the top give you permission to do so. That's an interesting discussion for another day. But at the very least, like I think the brutalism and the timelessness and the preternatural stuff and the gameplay and the destruction you can cause and the structures it examines are also intrinsically woven. Like it's such a tight thematic package that it's also just a treat and a nice bonus that the bureaucracy and the readings and the audio logs are so well written as well. Like I think it's taking all of the things that BioShock did so well back in the day and sort of repackaging that and then examining, you know, control and hierarchy and bureaucracy in, you know, 2019, 2020, in this age where most of us work for companies where we're the pawn in this giant system. And it's kind of refreshing to see a game be like, hey, actually, like you can rise up a little bit and you can make a difference and make a change. And I think that's maybe like kind of a positive thing. And a positive message to put out there into the world. So, do you guys have any...
just one, right, before you get into that bit.
Fuck me, that's... got a lore over here.
I just wanted to very, very quickly say that common misconception about brutalism, it doesn't actually come from the word brutal. It comes from the French béton brut, which literally translates into English as raw concrete. Just a little architecture tidbit for you there. I'll go back to eating my banana and being quiet.
You guys have any recommendations for this week?
Bananas.
Oh, no.
I have a lot of
all.
bananas. Come to my house and take some of my bananas. I have like too many. I have like 12. And they're all going to expire.
Been playing a bit of Minecraft Dungeons.
Yeah, how's that?
And it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's fine. It's not a great dungeon crawlery kind of game.
Yeah.
If you're like super into Diablo, you won't enjoy it. Weirdly, because it's like it's really just boring compared to Diablo. But like if you've never played a dungeon crawler and you like Minecraft, it can be fun. Like if you enjoyed Minecraft story mode, you're probably the kind of person that will enjoy Minecraft.
Maybe like a gateway into like dungeon crawlers.
Yeah, it's a good gateway. Yeah.
I've been watching Snowpiercer because they started Netflix made it into a TV show based on the books. It's real good. Yeah, it's a really slick piece of TV so far. It's only 2 episodes out, but it's really good. Rick and Morty's back, so I'm watching that. I've also been Darkest Dungeon just dropped their multiplayer modes. That's all I've been doing. It's extremely good.
It's quite
PvP.
Good, yeah.
Oh, it's so good.
Did you see that? Did you see the one episode where he turned himself into a pickle?
Wait, say that.
Funniest shit I have ever seen.
Oh yeah, David bought Pickle Rick's.
No!
Funniest shit I've ever seen.
No!
And I've been reading the Walking Dead comic, which is still extremely good. Been rereading that for research for a video. I think that's about it. Otherwise, you can find us on the internet everywhere at Dcm.Works. We're on all the socials. Best place to go to find all that content is youtube.com/DCMWorks. If you want to support us, patreon.com/DCMWorks. Big thanks to Joep Coumans and Cameron, our 2 biggest Patreons for this month. And this episode was brought to you by my novel, Maynard Trigg and the Creature Beneath the Veil. Head to maynardtrigg.com and use code June20 for 10% off your first paperback. That's June20 for 10% off your first paperback.
It completely stopped burning.
Yeah.
Completely stopped burning.
It's fireproof as well. I think that's all of my plugs. If you want to follow us individually, I'm at DC on my hate pie.
I'm at Literal Citrus.
I'm eating a banana.
And we'll see you guys.
We'll see you guys. I'm so mad at you, Adam. We'll see you guys next time.
Don't stop recording. We need to come up with some good banter to go like right after the outro music.
What?
We need something to put after the outro music.
And you think this is going to be that?
Mm-hmm.
Something.
This is good banter.
Something.
What do you mean after the outro music?
What do you mean after the outro music?
After the outro music.
Ben, if you're just going to say everything I'm saying, this isn't going to work.
I'm legitimately confused. Like what?
I'm not sure what's happening. I did buy those.
Yeah, do you guys actually not watch the podcast?
No, I don't.
I usually when the credits roll, I turn it off. I watch the scrub and that's it.
I don't. I've never listened or watched to this podcast ever.